Hey guys, welcome me to Sky World. A secret investigation into alleged sexual abuse at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, the training ground for the Coast Guard's top officers, uncovered a dark history of rapes, assaults and other serious misconduct being ignored and, at times, covered up by high-ranking officials. The findings of the probe, dubbed Operation Fouled Anchor, were kept confidential by the agency's top leadership for several years. Coast Guard officials briefed members of Congress this month after inquiries from CNN, which had reviewed internal documents from the probe. Despite credible evidence of assaults dating back to the late 1980s, investigators found that most of the alleged perpetrators were not criminally investigated at the time. Instead, the incidents were handled as administrative violations, and punishments, if they happened at all, were as minor as extra homework or lowered class standings. Sometimes, even those pushed out of the academy were still able to serve in the U.S. military. As a result, some of the accused ascended to top roles at the Coast Guard and other military agencies. In contrast, many alleged victims left the academy after reporting their assaults, ending their hopes of a career in the service. This investigation made clear that the school's leadership was more concerned at that time about organizational and Coast Guard Academy reputation than about the victims of crimes who were members of our service. A draft of the Fouled Anchor final report from 2019 said, sexual assault survivors said that what the academy put them through continued to affect their mental health, personal relationships and careers, according to records and interviews with CNN. They detailed suicide attempts, battles with depression and anxiety, emergency room visits and long lists of medications they have used to help them cope with the lingering trauma. Whose fault is it that he was still in the Coast Guard 20 years later? If I'm sounding frustrated, it is because I am. Kerry Carwin, a Coast Guard veteran whose allegations were part of the Fouled Anchor probe, wrote in a 2018 letter she sent to Coast Guard leaders and then President Donald Trump about her alleged assailant. I upheld the Coast Guard core values, and an individual that assaulted me and other women retired honorably with higher benefits than I did. We are a service that saves people for a living. I'd like to think our own service members are people worth saving, Carwin wrote. The investigation was a historical reckoning of past abuses, but in some ways raises questions about the current culture of the Academy and Coast Guard at large. While the agency partially blamed the poor handling of sexual misconduct investigations on outdated views of sexual assault and officials who had left the Academy long ago, the Coast Guard continues to struggle to hold suspected sexual predators accountable, as a CNN investigation earlier this year revealed. Despite findings of wrongdoing against Academy officials and former students, Operation Fouled Anchor was quietly closed by agency leaders, many of whom had studied and worked alongside the alleged perpetrators. Two accused perpetrators were discreetly pushed to retire from the Coast Guard, according to internal records reviewed by CNN. Records show that there were nearly 40 cases where the Coast Guard no longer had jurisdiction over the alleged attackers, and local and federal criminal statutes had long run out of time, so no action was taken at all. The U.S. Coast Guard has not responded to inquiries from CNN about its handling of the probe, but did say in a statement given to CNN last month that the agency is dedicated to supporting and addressing the needs of survivors, improving access to justice, holding offenders accountable and ensuring a coordinated response to sexual assault and harassment. Democratic sense. Maria Cantwell of Washington State, chair of the Senate Commerce Committee, and Tammy Baldwin of Wisconsin sent a letter to the Coast Guard Friday, questioning why the report had been kept secret, even from those in Congress with oversight authority over the agency. The senators expressed concern that substantiated perpetrators may hold security clearances and that two were allowed to honorably retire with their pensions and veterans' benefits intact. They requested additional information to help the committee determine if the Coast Guard complied with the law and to inform potential legislative actions. The senators also questioned whether the Coast Guard failed to use its authority to appropriately discipline individuals who were investigated and remained, in the Coast Guard. Operation Fouled Anchor, named after a ship's anchor that has become entangled around itself, was launched in 2014 when an Academy graduate claimed that her allegations of rape from years earlier had never been investigated. She said, school officials pressured her not to pursue the issue. Her alleged rapist had gone on to be a top officer in the Air Force and was the only person to face criminal charges in military court as a result of the probe, but an appeals court ended up ruling in his favor and dismissing the